everyone, and I want to thank you and welcome you to the latest edition of the Joyship Project Reading Discussion. For those of you who don't know me, I'm James Edward Mills, your host, and today I'm pleased to introduce this month's author, J. Robert Harris, author of the book Way Out There, Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker. JR, say something to our audience so they know that you're in the room.
I'm the guy who's talking right now, and thanks everybody for coming. I hope you enjoy it.
Awesome. Well, again, I'm going to go ahead and admit people as they come in. And before we dive into tonight's conversation, I'd like to acknowledge that I am screening into you tonight from Madison, Wisconsin, which is the ancestral homeland of the Ho-Chunk people, a place known for time immemorial as they joke. So please, wherever you are in North and South America, take a moment to acknowledge and recognize the Native people who once called the place you now live home. I'd also like to thank the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for their support for this and other online discussions hosted by the Joyship Project, as well as the financial contributions of Ceres Innovations and Outdoor Research, who provide us with the funds to pay each of our speakers every month a small stipend. And I want you to remember, as I do, that friends don't let friends work for free. So thank you for the financial support. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Joyship Project, I'm a freelance journalist and independent media producer with a specialty in outdoor recreation, environmental conservation, and acts of charitable giving. I have a further specialty in covering issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in access to our natural resources and our public land. And I also teach an undergraduate course here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison called Outdoors for All. And on the list of titles of the many books that we address are some of the books that we include in the Joyship Reading Project, and many of them are on our reading list. And this discussion is an opportunity for non-students and the general public to learn a little more about the experiences of people of color and our relationship with the natural world as shared through memory and academic research. And with that, I'm very excited to introduce our guest this evening, John Robert Harris. JR, as he's commonly known, has been exploring and backpacking long distances for more than 60 years in some of the most remote and inhospitable places in wilderness areas in the world, unsupported and mostly alone. He's written a number of articles about his experiences, as well as the book that we're going to be discussing tonight. JR is a frequent speaker at schools and universities and outdoor organizations such as the American Mountain Club, the Sierra Club, the Adirondack Mountain Club, the Audubon Society, the Explorers Club, LL Bean, and REI. His objective is to share the experiences to hopefully motivate others to pursue healthy outdoor lifestyle and activities in the outdoors. His trail name is School. Harris is also an advocate for more diversity, equity, and inclusion in the outdoors. And he's also on the board of directors of the 118-year-old Explorers Club. And he also chairs the club's DEI committee. Harris believes that diversity, equity, and inclusion will increase the number of people who will spend time in nature and getting out there. And they'll learn to appreciate and therefore protect our wild and scenic places and open spaces. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome J.R. Harris. J.R., thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Oh, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. This is great.
Well, and I love this beginning conversation. I really enjoyed your book. And I was really gratified to learn that, like you, you grew up as a city kid. And so did I. I mean, I grew up on the West Coast in Los Angeles. You grew up in New York City. And like me, you were also a Boy Scout. And my first question for you is, so how did those early experiences in scouting help to inform or maybe even define your interest in the outdoors and getting out there?
Well, I should begin to say that when I first joined the Boy Scouts as a young teenager, I didn't like it. You know, I was sure I wasn't going to like it. And especially when my parents put me on a bus and sent me up to the Catskill Mountains for summer camp at Boy Scout camp, Uh, I just didn't want to do it. It was crazy. I wanted to stay home with my friends. But I'll tell you, once I got off the bus and started looking around, and those first couple of days, the environment was so different from what I was used to growing up in the projects in New York City. And right away, I began to see the contrast between how I was growing up and that there was another kind of life, another existence in a different environment, a natural environment. And so there was an initial reaction to it that was pretty positive. And then, of course, for the first few weeks up there, I started learning how to read a topo map and use a compass and build a fire in a rainstorm and track animals and which plants are edible and all these outdoor skills. And I just started thinking differently. I began to get an appreciation for nature that I never had. I was seeing sights I never saw. And so when I got home, I was a different kid, and from there on out, every summer after that, I was looking forward to going back up to Scout Camp. So different from that first time.
And what's interesting too, from what I've read, is you enjoyed it so much that you actually took food out of the commissary and created your own kit, and you would go out all by yourself. You're up at camp for 8 weeks in the summer. You go out there all by yourself and only come back when your parents came to visit.
Once I got my camping, cooking, and pioneering merit badges, the famous CCP trio of badges, you were allowed to requisition food from the commissary. You had to tell the leaders where you were going, but you could actually go out on your own. Now, you had to tell them where you were. I found a really, really nice campsite overlooking a lake, and that's where I went. That's where I spent most of the time. Now, I have to say, most of the kids didn't do it, even the ones who qualified to do it. They wanted to stick around at the camp and do all of the sports and all that other stuff. So I guess that was my first realization that I could be out there alone and enjoy it. And I really did enjoy it. And I still enjoy it.
Yeah. And how old were you at that time? You had to be 12, 13 years old?
13. Yeah, like 13.
Yeah. And again, I think that it really was the beginning of what turned out to be a really long career as a solo adventurer. And your book begins with the trip that you took through Canada in 1966. And just to put that into context for everyone in the room, that's the year I was born. So you've been doing this for a long time. I'm really kind of curious to know, like, how old were you then, and what prompted you to take that trip, and what was it like?
So in 1966, I was 22 years old. I'm obviously older than dirt. I had just finished my 4 years in college. I was looking for an adventure, and I looked on a map, and it was going to be a road trip because I had a beat up Volkswagen Beetle, and I didn't have a lot of money. And I saw a map, and the northernmost road, the farthest north you could drive in 1966, was 120 miles north of Fairbanks, Alaska. You could not go any farther north than that back then. And I said to myself, if I were to drive all the way there, to the very end of that road, then every single vehicle, car, truck, motorcycle, bus would be behind me. And there would be no vehicle between me and the North Pole. And for that crazy reason, I got in my car and I drove up there. I drove through Canada. I'd never been to Canada before, never been to Alaska. Alaska had only been a state for like 10 minutes. It became a state in 1959. There were like 13 people living there. They hadn't discovered oil yet. And here I was, driving up there. And, it was quite the adventure, I have to say. I had no money, just a dream, and when I crossed into Canada, I drove straight up from New York City into Canada. Then I drove all the way across Canada to the west, and then back north again after that up to Alaska. And when I crossed into Canada, everybody thought I was running away from being drafted to go to Vietnam. It was the Vietnam era. And I said, no, 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 I'm going to drive all the way through. I'm going to end up in the States, in Alaska. And they said, yeah, right, sure, But I was there. I was gone.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring that up because that's the era that we were in. That was
Yeah.
the time when a lot of young people, young men in particular, were making their way to Canada, not to seek adventure, but to, evade joining the military. And also, I would imagine for a certain amount of conscientious objector status. Now, as a young person at that time, I mean, it's also fair to say, too, that that was kind of the height of the civil rights movement, too. What was your
Yes.
experience like as a young Black man on those roads in 1966?
Well, while I was on that trip, I didn't have any negative experiences with anybody. If anything, people were really curious about a guy with a beat up car with New York City license, but with New York State license plates on it. And when I was the first few days when I was driving, I would tell everybody that I was heading for Alaska. And then when I was almost to Alaska, I would tell everybody I was driving all the way from New York City. So either way, people were curious. Yeah, the 60s were, the heart, I think, of the civil rights movement. And the school I went to, actually Queens College, at that time, anybody who remembers those days, there were three freedom riders, two white guys and a Black guy who drove down there and were murdered while they were there. And the two white gentlemen actually went to school with me. I was a schoolmate of theirs. They went to Queens College, same time I did. So yes, that was right during that era. And I was college age like everybody else back then, and very, very much involved in it. But the Alaska trip, was seemed to be beyond that. I drove away from politics and I drove away from everything just for the adventure of it.
Wow. Yeah, and also, I mean, you just got out of college. Now, can I assume that you got a degree in marketing, or because that was a big part of your career?
My degree is in psychology.
Ah, okay.
And actually, when I was in college, there was no marketing degree yet.
Okay, that's what I figured.
Yeah,
okay.
So I went into corporate America as a marketing person based on my because I was a social scientist based on my degree in psychology.
Okay.
And I'm still in it. I started my own business in 1975, and I'm still in business now.
Wow. And what kind of products and services were you marketing at the time? And what was the focus of your career as a marketing executive?
Well, when I started in 1975, and understand that for 9 years prior to that, I worked in three different large corporations in marketing. The mid 1970s was an era when corporations especially, first began to be interested in the African-American consumer, recognizing that we had big spending power and a lot of potential for them to market their brands. And so it was, the timing was right for me because I was one of the few Blacks who had any kind of experience in marketing back then. And I worked for National Broadcasting Company in media. And then I worked 3 years in general foods and packaged goods. And then I worked 3 years in PepsiCo in the international division, working overseas. So I had really good background in marketing before I started my consulting firm in 75. So I was working for all kinds of companies, whether they manufactured a product or they were in a service. If they were primarily interested in the African American market and getting their products and services in front of people, they would call me up and hire me. Actually, me and my brother, who was my partner.
Okay, we're going to circle back to that later in the conversation because we were speaking a minute ago about the issue of representation when it comes to the outdoor recreation industry. But I want to stay in your earlier days. Just out of curiosity, now your trail name is School. How did you get that trail name, and what does it mean to you?
Well, it seemed like when I'd be out on the trail hiking, everybody I met was like 20 years younger than me, at least. And people were so surprised that an African American would be out there by himself, and B, that I've been doing this for so long. And, everybody wanted to know what was in my backpack and, what kind of tent did I use and what kind of this and that. And people would ask me their opinions about, river crossings and hanging up your food to protect it from bears and things like that. And so somebody once said, you're a walking school. And so that was it, it became School, and the thing about it is I've had that nickname now 30 years. I've been to School. So yeah, I've been out there a long time and still out there.
Well, and as we were discussing earlier, I mean, one of the things I enjoy most about your writing style is that you teach but don't preach. You provide an education without laying on a lot of unnecessary detritus information that makes you wish that you hadn't asked the question in the first place. And I find this ironic too, because in your book, you talk about your closest friend growing up, a man by the name of Ken Pepper. And the two of you created what might loosely be described as a guiding company called Broken Bow, which is short for Brothers Ken and Bob, which I think is a brilliant piece of marketing. And I just think that is so completely cool. Now it didn't last very long. Because you weren't all that interested in leading people into the outdoors, despite your ability to teach so well and to provide that school education. First of all, what is it about going solo? Why would you prefer to do these experiences by yourself as opposed to doing them with a group or even with, one or two companions on the trail, like your friend Ken?
Well, first I want to say that the relatively few trips that I've taken with friends have all been great. Right. Have all been great. I enjoyed every single one of them. And so I also want to say that I'm not antisocial. I'm not misanthropic. I'm not, hard to get along with. But, my trips always had a purpose. I wanted to see something or learn something or meet some people living off grid. And basically it was my dream. And for someone else, to want to come with me, they would have to really be buying into my dream. And they'd have to be able to get away from work for weeks at a time. They'd have to have all the experience. They'd have to have the gear. They'd have to be willing to spend the money to do it. And it happened every once in a while, but essentially it was me doing kind of a self-actualization, learning who I was. And to be honest, I was also in it for the adventure, and I really couldn't expect that a lot of people would do it. A lot of people wanted to do it. A lot of people were glad I did it. A lot of people couldn't wait till I get back to find out, what happened. But in order to fulfill it or satisfy my curiosity, I knew I had to go alone. And I actually, again, I enjoyed it. I guess I'm just a loner, maybe.
Oddly enough, though, I like that you say that you're not misanthropic, which you are not. You're not hard to get along with. You're a very pleasant person.
I'm beautiful.
I would even describe you as an extrovert, perhaps. And and clearly, it's just a question of being able to be who you are, where you want to be. And I really love, especially some of the descriptions that you've made of places like the Bob Marshall Wilderness. And that was one of the areas that I think you spent some of your earliest, most formative years. Now, first of all, I think that you just like the idea of being named after a wilderness area or have a wilderness area named after you. If we were going to name the J.R. Harris Wilderness Area, where would it be? and, and what would you like most to have to be a wilderness area that you would lay claim to?
That's a great question. I've been asked a lot of questions. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. And I think that if I had a choice, if somebody said, listen, buddy, we're going to name a wilderness area after you, it can be anywhere in the world, I would just want it to be someplace that is pristine, that's not been overrun with people, that has wildlife that are living wild and free, and that nothing would be there that would attract people who would want to develop it. And so whether it's in Alaska or in Lapland or the Andes Mountains or Australian outback, as long as it's beautiful, it's pristine, and it's quiet and it's protected. You could call it the J.R. Harris Wilderness. I'd be absolutely thrilled. Absolutely.
Okay, we'll start the write-in campaign for that.
Yeah, there you go, everybody.
You can see that you need to find the perfect place for it. But and kind of lead up to that question. I mean, part of our ability to do something like that is to make sure that we've got buy-in from as many people as possible to make sure that there are indeed areas that are pristine, that do have accessible but still pure wilderness. How is it that we can do that today based on, where we're at right now culturally and socially, especially when it comes to people of color, underrepresented segments of the population? How does your example and the work that you've done help to move along the notion of having protected wilderness areas that we can have 100 years from now for future generations?
Well, first of all, I'm hoping that by me going out there, it will encourage other people to just go out there. And when I say out there, I don't necessarily mean go out there like I go out there, 3-4 weeks by myself in the middle of nowhere, but to go out to the extent of your ability and your interest and your physical fitness. I believe it's in a sense, it's about numbers, and that the more people who go out there, the more they will begin to appreciate what nature is like. And by appreciating the great gift of untrammeled nature, they will be encouraged to protect it and be stewards of it. And so that's essentially it. If people like me continue to go out there and tell people, give them some idea what it's like and what it's about, and encourage other people to just give it a try, give it a chance, and that you're never really too old to do it, you're never really too young to do it if you do it within the boundaries of how you can enjoy it. Then I think that a lot of the issues out here now around people being uneasy about going out and being like, I think all those issues will begin to dissolve once we get a lot of people out there. And that, again, by going out there, they will see the need to protect it, and will stand up and say, listen, we need more public spaces, more national parks, and so forth. So everybody go out there.
Well, and oddly enough, though, that's the interesting balance, right? I mean, we want to get more people who are prepared to protect it, but we don't want to have too many people. Also, we want to have a broad cross section of the American public, so that we have some diversity in terms of the people who are actually out there. And one of the things that we need to do is to make sure that we are, I guess, not afraid to go, or don't have the limitations to go. But some of the things that you've done and the places you've been can be pretty scary, and there's one passage in your book, it's my personal favorite. We were talking about it earlier on page 82. Can I get you to read it for us?
Nah, I'm not going to read it. No, I'm just kidding. So the background is that I'm alone in Baffin Island, northern Canada, walking across the sixth largest island in the world, and the name of this chapter is "Alone and Scared," appropriately. And so this passage goes: when I passed the middle of the gorge, progress became slower and much more difficult as the cable slanted up towards the far side. I tugged frantically on the pulley, trying to haul the load. Progress was made in inches. My uplifted arms ached and my gloved fingers were numb and freezing. If I let go with one hand or even loosen my grip, the chair would slide back toward the middle. With each agonizing pull, I glanced in the direction of the cliff ahead, hoping for some sign that the crossing was almost over. At last, I could see the other side, and a final blast of adrenaline propelled me to the end of the cable. Now, this is a story about a gorge that I came to where there was a old, rusted, skinny cable going across, and attached to it was a rickety little seat. And the idea was you had to sit in the seat, reach up, and pull yourself on a pulley across to the other side. And I looked at that and I said, oh no, I can't do this. This is crazy. The water was blasting through the channel down below, and it looked like that cable couldn't hold me, that it was going to break, and there was no way I could turn around and go back. And actually, if I had only been with even one other person, it would have been pretty easy, because one person could get in the chair and you help pull that guy across, and then you have somebody on either side, and then you each backpack goes across, and then finally the last guy goes across, and so there's somebody on at least one side to help pull. But me being alone, it wasn't possible, and I was standing there. I remember it started snowing, and there was no place for me to camp, and I was thinking, if this cable breaks, nobody will ever know what happened to me. Nobody will ever see me again. And it will be all over in an instant. And from there, I obviously made it, but I began to think about what fear is and what you learn from fear and how fear can impact you and what the different kinds of fear are. And so for me, these trips and a lot of these incidents are learning experiences, and they contribute to who I am as a person and the experiences that I've had, and what can be learned when you're out there and you have to make decisions on your own, and you have to face your own fear and your own mortality, and you come back a different person. You really do.
Yeah, and I love this line where you say, "I learned that fear is a part of life." And it can be a very healthy part, especially when you realize that in a life-threatening situation, it is possible to rise above panic and maintain control of rampaging emotions. I understood that having heart really is not the absence of fear, but the acceptance of it. It's a good lesson to learn because you never get too old to get scared.
That's for sure.
Yeah, and I love that passage, mainly because as I'm getting older, I'm constantly thinking about what mortality is and what it means, but at the same time we're also talking about people who might have minor fears, that are still paralyzing to them, like going into a wilderness area all by themselves, or even with a group of people, because they don't know what to expect. What can we do to encourage people, to have a better understanding of the importance of fear in life and working towards overcoming that fear?
I got to tell you, you asked some nice questions. uh, if I had to kind of boil it down, my thing would be, my advice would be, don't be afraid of being afraid.
Yep.
It's going to happen. If you worry about being afraid, you're going to limit what you do and what your experiences are. If you can become confident that if something scary happens, you can deal with it, and you're not afraid to be afraid, then it's going to be it's going to make a big difference, I believe. It's going to be something that would encourage you, not only in the wilderness, but even back home, where things can happen, that you don't have to be really tense. You don't have to go through a lot of stress, because you built up enough confidence to know that, hey, if something happens, I'll just figure out a way to deal with it.
And it doesn't have to be limited to, figuring out how to get across a narrow cable on to get from one end of a gorge to another. I mean, sometimes it's literally just, figuring out how to stay warm on a cold day, and how to, navigate your way, even, through the New York City transit system. I mean, those are the interesting challenges that, that we have to face. And part of, much of this conversation, and getting back to what we were talking about before with regard to your marketing career, one of the things that is challenging, especially when it comes to people who don't always see themselves as part of the natural environment or part of the adventure culture, one of the things that helps us to do that is an exercise in marketing, and that's books and movies and television shows, et cetera. How do we go about making the outdoors more accessible to more people by better representing them in popular culture? What can we do to make it so that people can, shed a bit of their fear by recognizing that they do indeed have a place in the outdoors?
Well, in my professional career, I've done a lot of consulting for agencies like the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, specifically to find out how to get more BIPOC, people of color, to overcome their issues and get outdoors. And essentially, what I found out is that, yeah, people are reluctant to go because they don't know of anyone who looks like them who's been out there before. And consequently, they feel that there may be some negativity or some reaction that inhibits them. But once they actually go out and try it one time, this I find breaks down quite a bit and quite quickly, that they say, hey, this isn't so bad, and so the more they try it, the more they like it, ideally. And so I think there's a lot to have people overcome whatever their initial concerns are about being outdoors, and just going out there with the idea of, hey, I'm just going to have some fun. I just want to get some exercise. I'm not looking to, totally change my life, at least not immediately. I just want to go out and be outdoors. And I think that once you begin to have an appreciation for being outdoors and how healthy it can be, and how it can improve who you are and your outlook, mentally, emotionally, physically, I think that that's kind of the way to get out there. I think I sense that essentially people would like to go outdoors. I sense that people feel that it's a good thing to do. It's healthy to go out there. And so it makes it easier for a lot of people to overcome the initial concerns that they have about actually being outdoors. So try it, you'll like it. If you want to put it down in 5 words, I think that's 5 words.
Well, those are the best words we can use today. Try it, you might like it.
I like
So
it.
now you've been a lot of different places, literally all over the world. So where haven't you gone that you would most like to go?
I have not been to Antarctica. And so I'd like to go there, but the more you travel and the more places you go, the more you realize that you haven't been everywhere. I mean, everybody tells me, man, you've been everywhere. I haven't been everywhere. And at this stage in my life, I like to go any place just because I hadn't been there. If it's someplace I haven't been to yet, I like to go. So yeah, I've been in the jungle, I've been in the desert, I've been in the Arctic, I've been in the forest. I've been in every kind of environment around the world, but there are still a lot of places I haven't really been to, and that's it. If I haven't been there, I want to go there. I want to see what it's like. I don't get it. I can't read a book and be satisfied. I have to just go there. Figure it out and just go there.
I love hearing that. I've got one more prepared question, but I want to make sure that I don't take up the entire conversations with my questions. So please, if you'd like to ask JR a question of your own, please put it in the chat or raise your hand, and I'll be sure to call on you in the chat screen. My last question for you, JR, again, I really, really, really have enjoyed this conversation. It's been fabulous getting to know you personally. Can you perhaps share with us what might be described as your most formative experience in the outdoors? Was there a moment when you might describe that instant as being especially transformational or transformative?
Well, there've been about 50 of those. The one that I remember particularly, one of many, is when I was I did a trek across a mountain range in Tasmania, and I got lost. And in trying to find my way, trying to find the trail, I took my backpack off and put it down because it was really heavy. And when I finally located the trail and got oriented, and I went back to pick up my pack, I couldn't find it. And I knew right then and there how big a mistake that was. The sun was going down. All I had on was a t-shirt. I was starting to really shiver already, first indication of hypothermia. I had no food, I had no tent, I had no clothing, I had no gear. And I knew that if I didn't find my pack before it got dark, there was no way I was going to survive through the night. It was just too cold. There was no way to make a fire. It was high up in the mountains. And what bothered me the most was that I knew that when they finally found my body and found my pack and realized what happened, that everybody would say, boy, what a jerk that guy was, man. He took his backpack off and left it there. What a rookie mistake that was. And that really, really bothered me, and I just couldn't shake that feeling of, oh man, if you gotta go, at least, fight off a grizzly bear, or something like that, not like this. And when I finally found it by accident, just before nightfall, all I could do was just sit there. I was really overcome. you know, at how, you know, how transient life is, how at any moment everything can change. And it made me a lot more grateful to be alive. It made me appreciate all the things that maybe I was taking for granted. It certainly made me more careful in the future. Um, and yeah, from that day, I was definitely a different person.
Wow. Wow. That I trust me, I've been there. You know, there's there's nothing worse than making you feel like you are, you know, in one of those very gripped moments, and you you discover what really matters. One of our audience members is curious about the picture behind you. She asks, "It looks like a volcanic lake. Can you tell us where that is?"
Yeah, that trip is in Tasmania. That trip is in the Western Arthurs in Southwest Tasmania. The probably the hardest, most difficult trip that I ever took. But in this picture is actually a campsite where I spent the night. And so when I saw that picture in an art store in Australia, I said, "Oh wow, you know, that's Lake Oberon."
Hmm.
And you know, it's a really stark, cold environment there. Nobody lives there, but at the same time, there's an unusual beauty about it. You know, the weather is harsh, but it's just it's hard to explain. But that's why I go there, because I just want to see it. And so every time I look at this picture back here, it brings back memories that are both good and bad. But it also reminds me of how much you can learn about yourself when you allow yourself to have different experiences.
Wow. Looks like we've got a question from Laura Dirks. Laura, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, hi. Thanks so much for your stories.
Thank you.
I just was curious, and also for all the service you've done for all the nonprofit organizations you're involved in with. I'm also involved with Sierra Club and many others, and I'm just curious, given all the sort of seismic organizational change many of those organizations are going through right now, what would your advice be to them as they think about making their organizations not middle and middle upper class white led organizations, and how they need to just to be different
Yeah, you know,
and really from the bottom up?
yeah, thank you, Laura. In my business, I've done consulting for organizations such as these, organizations that specifically wanted to become more diverse, but didn't really know how to do it. And so, because I have experience doing that, and I can avoid a lot of mistakes that organizations make or can make, I'm asked to come in and kind of get them started and get them on the road to becoming more diverse. Typically, the organization on its own wants to become diverse. They realize that by being more diverse, you're going to get different perspectives. You're going to get different ways of thinking about it. And if you're everybody is basically on the same page in terms of conservation or preservation of the wilderness or encouraging people to get to the outdoors, they realize that it's better to be diverse, that it's not just to be politically correct. You know, it's about making your organization better by taking advantage of the different points of view and different perspectives that people can bring to your organization. And so that's really the key. And I think that organizations they're starting to realize it more and more. Some of them look back on their organization, especially if they were rather old, and the image that the organization has, which really doesn't fit anymore in the 21st century. But they really want to make the best out of whatever their organization is formed to do, and they're realizing that one way to make that happen is to seek out and strive for greater diversity, and then having achieved diversity, make sure that it's equitable and inclusive once you get the people to come in. And so I'm encouraged by the progress that a lot of these organizations are making, as well as by the number of organizations that really are committed and understand and want to take advantage of these diverse members and the attitudes and the experiences that they bring.
Well, thank you very much for the question and a fabulous answer. Cicely, would you like to go next?
Thank you so much for being here. I've really enjoyed your book.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm curious if you feel, when you're in the outdoors, if you feel more fully yourself and whole, and if so, in what ways? And also, how do you bring that back to your everyday life in between your trips?
Yeah, good question. As you already know by now, I like being in the outdoors. I like being alone. What I like is hello. What I like is the contrast between my life at home and my life out in the wilderness. I like and I appreciate living a simpler life. When you go out and all your worldly possessions are what you can put in your backpack, your food, your clothing, your shelter, all your gear, that's it. And when you're living that kind of an existence, you know, a simple life, and simple is not easy. Simple is actually hard because it's simple. But what it does, one of the main things it does, is it really makes you appreciate all the things that you probably were taking for granted, like being able to take a shower or reaching into the refrigerator to make a peanut butter sandwich, you know, or turning on the air conditioning when the weather is hot, you know, and when you begin to appreciate all these little things, it has an impact on you, you know, and this is one thing that I can say has impacted my life over the years, is what I've learned about myself. You know, I could say I go out, you know, to learn about glaciers and to learn about wildlife and to learn about people who are living a subsistence lifestyle somewhere, and that's all great. But it's what you learn about yourself when you're out there that really impacts who I am, and this is what I really appreciate about all the years I've gone out there and all the trips that I've taken. It's what I've learned about who I am and how much I appreciate and can feel humble that you're only a little small part of a huge whatever, and in reality you don't really mean that much at all, and nature will throw that right in your face if you don't believe it. But it's a good thing, you know, it's a real good thing, you know. And when I come back, I typically go to schools and I talk to kids, and, you know, and I tell them that they can be whatever they want to be, you know, even if people are discouraging them and telling them to limit their ambition because they're poor or they're from a certain ethnic group or whatever. And I tell them, listen, you know, you can make it happen. It's not going to be easy. Nobody's going to give you anything. But hey, you know, if I can do it, anybody can do it. You know, because I just grew up in the projects, an ordinary guy. And, you know, and if I can make my dreams come true, anybody can make their own come true. And that's the message that I want to give to younger people, And that's really what I've learned in all the years I've been out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Jerry, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Harris, thank you so much for your talk so far. It's very enlightening and insightful.
Thank you.
I'm a professor at Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management Department at North Carolina State University. So I have a sort of personal curiosity, and so existing research indicate that a lot of people of color are sort of constrained by fear of racial discrimination when they try to visit great outdoors. Fear of racism is so strong that it prevents a lot of people of color to enjoy nature or outdoor recreation activities. I wonder if you ever experienced that, and if so, how would you advise other people of color to quote unquote go out there? I hope these questions are appropriate, and if not, please ignore.
No, probably your question's fine. I have to be honest and say that I haven't really experienced a lot of negative on my trips, but that's because A, most of them are overseas. B, most of them in areas that are so remote, I don't see anybody. White, black, green, orange, purple, there's just not a lot of people out there. And the people that are out there realize how extreme it is. And so when they see another person, they're like, oh, this guy must be one, somebody like me is willing to be out here. Plus I'm alone. But your point is well taken. I believe that there's just a lot of fear and uncertainty about how you will be treated for a lot of people. They're not afraid so much of grizzly bears or being struck by lightning or being swept away by a flood or even being lost or anything like that. What they're concerned about is what happens if I'm out here away from a city, away from a town, isolated, maybe in the mountains or woods, and I run into somebody who doesn't like me, who doesn't want me to be here. I think that that's what has to be overcome. And the way to overcome it, one way to overcome it, you have to at some point go out there. And when enough people are going out there so that it's not unusual for people who look like you to be out there, then that kind of anxiety, I believe, will diminish. And so again, you just have to go out there. Now, what's happening is a lot of these organizations, these outdoor organizations that cater to people of color, are sponsoring trips where you go out as part of a group. So at least at your first trip or your first few trips, you're learning what it's like to, hike 7 or 8 miles or maybe sleep in a tent or whatever, but you're feeling safe because you have other people around you that you can feel comfortable with. And I think that that's a good initial step. That's a good first step. But I think it's, if we keep going in the direction that we're going, where more and more people who never went out there before are saying, you know what, I'm going to go out there and see what it's like. We'll get to a stage eventually where it's not unusual to go out and see somebody who's Black or Hispanic or LGBTQ or Asian or whatever. It's just other people enjoying the outdoors.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Oh, great question. Kim, you've got a question.
Hi, thanks for having me. And thanks for being here, Mr. Harris. Quick
JR.
question. JR. You almost answered most of my question around fear and anxiety about being in the outdoors. You seem to have no fear. I do want to find one of these groups that I can go out with to try it. But I'm wondering what your favorite piece of gear is that you take out with you, and what's the basic gear that people need to do this backcountry hiking and staying in the outdoors?
Well, there's this thing called the 10 essentials. And these are 10 things that everybody should have when they go out there. things that where you can make a fire if you need it, light for like a flashlight, and you know, the right clothing and so forth. So you know, you can just go online and Google 10 essentials, and that's what everybody at the bare minimum should have. Now, as for my favorite, you know, thing of all the stuff I carry, what I carry, one thing I really enjoy having is a pint flask of cognac, so that at night, you know, whether it's been snowing, raining, harsh climbing, you know, or whatever, I can sit back in my tent before I zip into my sleeping bag. I'll unscrew my little flask, I'll pour a little into the cap, and I'll sip it. So sometimes, depending on the day, I'll knock it all back in one shot. And another day, I'll take 10 minutes to sip that like 1 ounce of stuff. But it's some way that it's a way that I can wrap up the day and just say, okay, buddy, you made it through another day. You're doing good. You know, you can go to sleep now and be back at it tomorrow. Now, I'll tell you something. If you bring a pint of anything that you like to drink and you pour one out, you know, every night before you go to sleep, you're going to get 18 of those. If your trip is longer than 18 days, you know, you got to do what you got to do, you know, either skip a night or whatever. But yeah, you know, so the first 18 days looking good. Although if I get down to be like 15, 16 days and I got another week to go, then that one cup, that little cup of cognac, I'm only going to take half of it. But I can't imagine being out there without it. So that's my favorite thing.
I gotta say, I did not expect you to go there, but now I'm going to make sure that I got my flask.
There you go. There you go.
All the time. Okay.
You'll be glad you have it.
Oh, absolutely. You know, but I gotta tell you, I never carry it with me, but I will from now on. It's always going to be my favorite thing. JR, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And everyone in the audience, with your questions and for your attention. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being engaged in this learning community, and I look forward to doing this again. I want to thank the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and also again for the financial support of Ceres Innovations and Outdoor Research. Now, we look forward to our next discussion, which hopefully will be next month. I'm actually, we're coming to the end of our set list of speakers and authors. I'm actually looking for book suggestions for the rest of the year. So if you've got any, I'd love to hear them. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and close out the hour and say thank you very much for being here. Good night and have a fabulous rest of the week and a wonderful weekend.